Welcome to episode 3 of Experts of the Roundtable. Today, we're joined by trauma hypnotist and the NLP queen, Tiffany Toombs Clevinger, to explore how our pasts shape our present. She's going to give breakthrough strategies for healing and practical tools for lasting transformation. So let's get into it. Perfect. I am here with Tiffany. Tiffany, it is a pleasure to have you on here today. I know I was just on your podcast yesterday and it was just a great time overall. If you want to just let everybody know a little bit about who Tiffany is, and then we can kind of take the conversation from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tiffany Toombs Clevinger, as you said, and I am a trauma hypnotist that is specialized in nervous system regulation and really helping entrepreneurs get out of their own way. And I'm a wife and a mother as well.
Love that. So, kind of take me back to like you can go as far back as like childhood, but like, is this something that you were dreaming of doing when you were younger, or?
Literally never. So had you told me at any point in time, even when I first started coaching, that this would be like what I did, what I was passionate about, what I was known for, I would not have believed you. Like growing up, it was marine biologist, then paramedic, and then athletic trainer. That was what I was dead set on. And life obviously had a different plan.
Love that. Was there like any like big moment that you were like, you know what, this is what I want to do? Is there something that happened, or was it just kind of you just fell into it?
Yeah. So I was, when I started coaching, I was living in Australia at the time. I'm from Canada originally, and I'd been dating somebody for 3 years. And we had what married couples would like in the relationship. I often had this thought of like, is this it? Like, is this what love is? But we had all of these like friends and married couples, like single friends were like, I want what you guys have. And married couples were like, we wish that our relationship was like yours, and says like, well, I guess this is it. And so, I mean, if you're asking that question, newsflash, it's probably not a great relationship,
Yeah.
or as good as it could be. So 3 years in, we had put an offer in on a block of land. We were going to build a house. He was telling everyone he was saving for a ring, blah, blah, blah. And he went away for a job interview. So at the time, fly in, fly out mining was really popular in Australia. I had been the breadwinner up until that point, and he was like, I want to provide the life that you deserve. So I was like, oh, that's so nice. Drove him to the airport because he had to go to Sydney for this interview. And I got home, hadn't been feeling well for a couple days. So I took a test, found out I was pregnant. Tried calling him. And for the first time in 3 years, his phone was off. And I was like, that's weird. And then I sat there for like the next hour trying to convince myself that something wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
That, oh, I'm sure his phone died. And then I've never done this in my life before or since, but I was trying to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. He had left his laptop at the house. So I went onto his laptop to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. His flights in his email, his flights were not to Sydney. They were to another state, but it was to a different city. And then I went into his Facebook and found all these messages to other women. And he had been cheating on me. He actually had a girlfriend in another state. So he'd went to spend the weekend with another girlfriend. But apparently he had all these other girlfriends that I had no idea about. And it was like the time difference between Australia and Canada meant it was the middle of the night for my family. And so when I tried calling them, they just wouldn't answer. And we had all the same friends. So I had like one person that I could talk to who was not a mutual friend, who was my friend exclusively. And my entire life collapsed. Over the next couple days, his phone was still off. And I got like, I just really found out he was a compulsive liar. Like nothing no, he had told me that he paid the deposit for the block of land. Didn't happen. He had actually forged this is the level of like of compulsive lying. He forged a bank statement because when we went to put the offer in on a block of land, I was like, we don't have this money. And he was like, I've been saving secretly. And I was like, no, you haven't. Like, you're terrible with money. And he's like, no, no, no. And I was like, prove it. Like, I don't believe you. Prove it. And he came home with a legitimate, like, letterhead from the bank showing that he had this money. Like, that was the level that this guy went to. So by the time he got back from the weekend, I had moved out and my life just spiraled from that point. Like, half of our friends were like, oh, he's a piece of crap. I knew he was a liar. The other half, he convinced that I just wanted to break up with him. And so I made up this whole story. And the majority of our friends believed him until he brought this woman that I said was true to his mom's 50th birthday, like a month later. Yeah, it was crazy. And then I miscarried the baby, but I hadn't told anybody that I was pregnant because I was so humiliated, right? I think I was like, I'm this highly intelligent woman, college degree, blah, blah, blah. And this is probably my ego talking. Like, this blue collar guy who's an apprentice boilermaker pulled one over on me. Like, that's humiliating. So I didn't tell anyone I was pregnant. So I went through the miscarriage completely alone. And the point where I knew that I had to make change was I was standing on the corner in downtown Melbourne, Australia, city of like 5 million people. It's Friday afternoon. I've just come out of a business meeting. All these people are like laughing and talking about their plans for the weekend and for the future. And I had just miscarried and I knew like I was just in such a dark place. I didn't know how I'd ever get out of it. And I saw a taxi coming and I was like, if I just take one step, nobody will view me as selfish. It'll look like an accident, but I don't have to feel the pain anymore. And so mentally committed to take this step. When I went to take it, I could not move. My feet were like rooted to the ground. And as the taxi went past, I was like, holy crap. Like, I just about did that. And I realized that I needed help. So started my own healing journey. Kind of took me 2 years to really find something that actually worked. I started with therapy, went to the rah-rah events, created accountability groups with people there, hired coach after coach after coach, which I could not afford at the time. I was already living paycheck to paycheck. But did all of that and nothing was working. And therapists and coaches kept telling me like, I'm surprised you're so well functioning in society with all you've been through, because there was some childhood stuff as well. And, you can't change the past. You just have to focus on the future. I'm like, cool, done that my entire life. It's made me a people pleasing, overachieving perfectionist who wants to kill herself. So I need a different strategy here. Right. Um, and I eventually found hypnosis and NLP, which completely changed my life. I was never doing it to learn how to use it with other people, but it was so powerful for myself that I was like, I can't not share this. And then I started using it just with friends. Like, again, I had another business. It was never going to be like my main thing. And the more I started sharing it with friends and seeing their transformations, the more I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just like do this as a hobby. Um, and I realized like I really had a passion for it and I really had a talent for it. And so the rest kind of just took over from there.
Wow. I did not know any of that. And we've been connected for a while now. That's a crazy story. I think a lot of people that go through something similar, they do turn to therapy and like there's only so much you can talk out. And
Yeah.
like even with some coaching and stuff, like there's only so much that you can really do with it. And I think NLP, I've gotten into it a little bit, but I haven't really fully experienced the true power or anything with it. But I know a lot of people who have, and they've all had just absolutely incredible results. When it comes to like not only your own journey, but the clients and stuff that come to you, like what are some of the biggest things that you've been able to overcome yourself with it? Or like we already know this kind of story, but is there Like anything else that you've been able to overcome that might not be more trauma, but maybe more like just day to day things?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of my clients have trauma. And I will say, like, therapy has a place. The thing that therapy helped me understand was that I had been abused as a child. And I think a lot of people will look at their life and they'll try and normalize it in some way. Like everybody that I've ever had, not everybody, the majority of people I've ever had come work with me are like, I don't have trauma, but can you still help me? And then we dig into it and they're like, I had this sexual assault or this rape or what. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have trauma? And I was the same way. I didn't have the sexual assault piece, but I did have physical abuse from my stepmom. And I was like, well, it was only every other weekend. And it was only until I was 7. So it's not really that big of a deal. Right. But when I really started like going to therapy, it was like, oh, that's abuse. Like if it happened to somebody else, would you call it abuse? And I was like, yeah. She's like, well, why wouldn't it be abuse for you? And I was like, oh. So in terms of like non-trauma, I mean, it just helps you get out of your way, right? Like we predominantly work with entrepreneurs. And so, people will come in and they're like, I can't create content. Like I just can't put it out there. I have one client right now who was struggling to ask for opportunities in her business, but she had been told by like a friend's mom growing up that she needed to tone it down. She was too much, right? Or like, if you had a parent who always compared you growing up, that happened to my husband. He was always compared to his sisters who were like the perfect Southern blondes, right? The cheerleaders, the gymnastics, straight A's. Here he comes, like the loud, ADHD, tons of energy, can't sit still boy, right in the middle of two girls. And so he always got compared. And so he felt this constant need to seek external validation. And so he would exaggerate some things sometimes, or he would be like this sometimes obnoxiously loud guy when I first met him because he was seeking that external validation. Like he needed other people to tell him that he was good enough. And now he's like so much happier, come off the anti anxiety meds, like so more chill, can focus more, right? He was told that he had ADHD, didn't. Shocker. It's like at least 20% overdiagnosed in the US alone, right? So like he had all these shifts that allowed him to show up better as a husband, as a father, as a marketer just by getting out of his own way. So, I mean, those are like some of the things we see. Had this one woman come to me when I first started my business in Canada, and she was like, I'm not losing weight and I am just really stuck in my career. I'm not sure what I want to do. She'd been sexually assaulted growing up by her grandpa. She was like, oh, but I dealt with it. And her dealing with it was like just moving to the other side of Canada and cutting her family out. That was her dealing with. And she, towards the end of our time working together, she was like, oh, my husband and I have to go to Mexico for a week. We go every year and I hate it. It's the worst week of my life. And I was like, that's kind of a weird thing to say about your vacation. She's like, yeah, we just don't really get along well. We kind of stay together for the kids. She came back, she called me and she was like, my husband thought that I totally was overpaying you and that this was just like BS. She's like, but now he thinks that I should pay you double what I've paid you. So this woman was in her 60s. She had never had an orgasm. She did not know that she had never had an orgasm. She was like, now I know why people rave about sex. Like, that was amazing. And me and my husband had the best week ever because she had cleared out like all of the fear around intimacy and receiving pleasure and all of that they actually connected. And she was like, our marriage, like you literally saved it. Even though we were staying together for the kids, you saved our marriage. So it's like things like that, right? Like I can never predict the results that are going to come. I just know there's going to be a massive shift.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know, like, the stuff my wife does, she does a lot of, like, energy clearing and stuff like
Mm.
that, and just hearing the outcomes that people have with I wouldn't consider NLP a more traditional side of stuff, like therapy and stuff like that, but I think we definitely need more of it, and I think the world is definitely going over towards that direction. I think it's scary the amount of adults that don't think that they have had trauma growing up, and, like, really, I think we all have at least had a little bit.
Yeah. It's part of the human condition. Like, even when we were pregnant with my son, which was the same time you guys were pregnant with your daughter, I I kept saying to my husband, like, he is a little bit of a helicopter dad, but I'm like, trauma is going to be part of his journey. Our challenges are A, to make sure that we're not the ones overly contributing to it, right? So we're not catastrophizing mistakes. We're not projecting our stuff onto him, number one. And number two is to make sure that he has the tools to deal with it because it's going to happen, right? Like trying to make it through life, not traumatized in a world that's full of trauma is just not going to happen. But we want to make sure like we're not projecting it onto other people because that happens in relationships, right? I'd say that's probably one of the number one reasons relationships fall apart is just that projection onto each other.
Yeah.
With kids catastrophizing mistakes, like I remember when my son was 1, he like made a big mess in the kitchen with like Tupperware, not even a big deal. And my husband was like, and I was like, it's Tupperware. Like it really, in the grand scheme of things, this mess, not a big deal. We're not even going to remember it in 5 years. So I don't want to catastrophize this, because that's where like the ADHD and things like that come from. The fear of like standing out, the fear of saying the wrong thing is because we catastrophize these mistakes. Even before we got on today, I had a client reach out and she was like, can I send you a sales call to review? I need to learn how to start taking feedback because in her mind, feedback means you're not good enough because during her childhood, somehow those two got linked. And so it's like, but does all feedback, like if you were giving me feedback as your coach, does that mean I'm not good enough as a coach? Or is it an opportunity to improve? Like you could be thrilled with me as your coach and still give me feedback on where I can improve because we're all human, right? So it's about like realizing these stories that we've been told as children. And between the ages of 0 and 7, when our unconscious mind is forming or conscious mind is forming, we make everything about us. So, like, if you get in trouble, it's going to feel like, well, I'm bad, right? And Brene Brown talks a lot about this. Like, is it you made a mistake or you are a mistake? Like, differentiating between those two. Like, we aim to not tell Chad, like, you're a good boy or you're a bad boy. It's this behavior that you're doing is good. This behavior, not, not so much, right? Because we don't want to make it about him.
Yeah, no, I like that. For, like, the parents and everything that are watching, what are some of the ways that you've kind of taken this into parenting without 'cause I know, it's like my wife with the shamanic healing and stuff like that, she doesn't wanna use some of her magic and powers and stuff like that as Athena's growing older until she's actually aware that her mom can do that. Is there any, like, precautions that you are taking or anything?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for us, number one, we cleaned out our friend group because there were some people that we were just like justifying relationships with, right? Like, oh, we know that person's maybe not always great. We can't fully trust them, but we can just deal with it. We're strong enough to deal with it. And then we're like, that's not a pattern. Like, for example, my family growing up, the way that we showed love was sarcasm and making fun of each other. But then I just had this constant, like, is this person being sarcastic or do they really mean it? And like, this constant, like, worrying that about everything, right? Always self conscious. So I said to my family, we're not doing that with Chad. We're not going to continue that pattern. So if you can't say the words I love you, then you don't need to, you don't need to be around. I'm not saying don't have a sense of humor, don't joke around, but if the only time you can say I love you is when you're drunk, this is not going to work. And so we cleaned up our friend group, set boundaries with people around us. And then we're just really intentional about the language that we use. Like more so, I don't want to be there similar to Sam. I don't want to be there like programming his mind with certain things. I mean, we do affirmations. We have since he was
Yeah, I
born
think
about you're lovable and you're worthy. Um, but I'm very careful about the manipulation side of things, right? With NLP. So like I, tell him on a regular basis, I'm responsible for my emotions. So, I think a lot of parents in attempting to get their kids to behave unintentionally use like blackmail and manipulation. Like, oh, it makes mommy sad when you do that. Like, I'm responsible for my feelings. You cannot make me feel anyway.
yeah.
So we're careful around that, like the catastrophizing mistakes, things like that. Very careful how we talk about money because I grew up in a family that talked about money as like being the devil, which was a major block I had to overcome. So we're like abundance in everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think those are the biggest things in parenting.
No, I love that. I think we get so caught up into how we were raised when we have children. Like even at the beginning of fatherhood for me, I noticed I was going into some patterns that my mom would kind of play out. And Samantha brought those to my attention. So I just really started becoming aware of what I was doing. And it's awesome that you have that awareness as well. I mean, with what you do, you probably have like extreme awareness to everything that's going on.
It doesn't mean I'm always perfect. There have
Yeah.
definitely been times when me and my husband have fought in front of him and he'll start getting loud and I'm like, okay, we're sorry. We're also another thing that we do intentionally is apologize to him, like admit, oh, I'm sorry. I messed up here. A, so that he can see like it's okay to own your mistakes, but also we both grew up in families that it was like, I'm the parent, I can do no wrong. So if I do something wrong or if I hurt your feelings, you should just suck it up because I'm the parent. I was like, yeah, we're not going to do that because that didn't work well in either of our relationships. So, um, yeah,
And it's crazy how many step parents are actually the abusers to their kids. Like growing up, I was in a really abusive household, and it was my stepdad that was abusive, and he would hit me. My little brother was his kid, so he was kind of like the angel, and he'd still hit him every once in a while. But when it came down to it, I was getting the brunt force of a lot of it.
what's crazy for me is that my stepmom was a domestic violence survivor. So she had been brutally beaten up in her previous 4 marriages, like not just once,
Wow.
but 4 times. And she was living in a women's shelter when my dad met her, my biological dad, still had fresh bruises. And for me, like looking back now, I can see it was when I was there, my biological dad doted on me and took the attention away from her. It was always when the spotlight was on me. And I was a natural performer growing up. So I'd like put on impromptu plays and dance shows or whatever. And she would lock me in closets, like literally
Wow.
remove me and put me somewhere that nobody could see. And she had a young daughter who would sit outside of the closet and cry for me. So I'm locked in this dark place and I'm having to comfort her daughter, who is quite a bit younger than me, maybe 5 years younger than me, that it was going to be okay. And then she would tell me for years, she told me that strangers hated blonde haired, blue eyed girls and would kill them if they saw them. And whenever I acted up, she would put me in the car, drive me to the outskirts of the city that I'm from, and tell me she was going to leave me there for a stranger to come and find. And the last time that I saw her, I was getting car sick coming back from a family reunion. And she threatened that if I didn't stop crying, I would never see my family again. And then she called my parents, my mom and my stepdad, and told them that if they weren't there in like 90 minutes, we were about 3 hours away from their house. If they weren't there in 90 minutes, she was taking me back to Ontario with them and they'd never see me again. And so it was just like this constant like message that it wasn't safe to stand out. It wasn't safe to like use my voice or be vocal. So that's been one of the biggest things as an entrepreneur that I've had to overcome, especially in a culture that's like rampant with cancel culture, is like
Yeah.
really owning my voice and being like, I'm just going to say like what needs to be said here and be okay with some people not liking that.
I mean, that must have been fucking terrifying to be put in that situation especially at such a young age.
Yeah, so it was between 3 and 7 that it happened, and it was always when my biological dad wasn't there,
Yep.
and I hated my biological dad, like, I never liked him, but I had to go, and what's even crazier is that when I was 7, they moved to the other side of Canada. She wanted to move to Ontario, and he moved with her, and I always felt this sense of, like, "You chose her over me." Even though I didn't like him, and I was happy to not have to spend any more time with him, I was like, "You still chose her over me." So I had this
Mm.
crazy abandonment wound for so long, and I was like, "I have to be a people pleaser so people don't leave me." And I tried talking to my mom about it when I was, like, 15 or 16, and she was like, "We don't like him anyways, so that's just ridiculous." And I was like, "I know, but that's how I feel." I know logically it doesn't make any sense, but this is how I feel. And so, like friendships, business partnerships in the beginning, relationships, I was just this huge people pleaser. I couldn't break up with anybody. I couldn't set boundaries. Yeah. It's crazy how it plays out in adulthood. I think how your patterns from childhood come.
Oh no, 100%. I've dealt with the same stuff, the people pleasing, not being able to set boundaries. I mean, I was in a very, very bad relationship for 9 years and just kept going because I was comfortable and I didn't wanna hurt anybody, yet we were hurting each other every single fucking day. So
Yeah. And then it's like there's like this, well, if I leave, what if nobody else ever loves me? Like
yeah,
that was why I stayed in my toxic relationship. Like I don't want to hurt him because he loves me. And like if I leave, I'm gonna lose all my friends. And what if nobody likes me ever again? And
yeah.
so it was just easier to stay, even though it was meh.
Yeah, that, the fear of, like, being alone. I know my mom stayed because it was, like, a whole money issue where she didn't think that she'd be able to afford living on her own with me and my brother and having to pay rent, her car payment, and stuff like that. So when I was in the relationship, I was like, "I'm not gonna be able to pay my bills if we, like, break up or get a divorce," all of that, and so I just kind of stayed partly because of that as well, and it's just crazy how everything just plays out as we, like, do get older.
Yeah. When I left that relationship, even though I was looking for healing, it took me like 2 years to find healing, but something that worked. But I got out of that relationship right when Tinder launched. And my roommate at the time was like, "You just need to get on Tinder. Like, you need to see that, like, you're an attractive woman, just get on Tinder."
What a great
And
roommate.
so right? So and then my best friend was a guy at the time, and he was in a serious relationship, so he was encouraging it as well. He's like, "Yeah, do it. Let me live vicariously through you." So I was drinking a ton and sleeping around. Like, and for me, I would go through these cycles where I was like, I just want to be alone. And I'd like go into hermit life and I'd like work on improving myself. And I'd be like, okay, I'm ready to come out. And I'd go on Tinder and I would start equating like attention from men as like, I'm good enough. And so it was like, I needed men to pay attention to me and want to have sex with me in order to feel good enough. And I'd feel good for like the 30 seconds that it lasted. And then I'd feel like,
The 30
so
second.
empty. I mean,
Yeah.
so, and then I'd be like so empty and hating myself. And I had to repeat that cycle a couple times to like figure out like, that is not what I want. Like we gotta break this cycle because
Yeah.
it's brutal. And I took a sabbatical from dating. Like I was like, I am not dating for a year. Like I'm going to date myself. I'm going to take myself out on these dates. At that time, like doing anything alone was terrifying. So I like forced myself to go to lunch alone and to go to movies alone and to go to museums alone, which is amazing. That time by myself, like it was so uncomfortable, but it was probably one of the best things I ever did to like really start connecting with myself.
Why do you think it is so uncomfortable? Because I know I would go out to dinner by myself as well, and I'd always have this like eerie feeling that people are feeling like sorry for me or sad for me because everybody's there on a date or they're there like with their family, and then here comes this guy in there just completely alone. But I personally love it because I get to pay as much as I would for two people and just everything by myself.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like why suicide rates spiked during COVID, right? It's the being alone with yourself. And for me, like when I initially started the self dates, I had a phone or a book with me all the time so I could like distract myself. And
Yeah.
then I realized like I'm not really getting anything out of this. So I stopped bringing phone and book, or they had to stay in my bag. And that was the point that everything started to change because I had to like sit and be with my thoughts. I had to sit and be with myself. And I think that's why COVID was such an awakening for so many people, but was also so hard for people, was
Yeah.
because all of the distractions were gone, right? Like all of the things that you would go out and do. I mean, obviously, there were still distractions in the house with social media and whatever, but you couldn't go to the gym or you couldn't go to the bar, and all of these like vices that people had to avoid dealing with themselves all of a sudden were taken away. And that's like the most powerful part of the work, I think, is like starting to listen to the voices in your head, the which in a lot of cases are like the inner children that need healing,
Yeah.
but like listen to what they're saying. And then for me, it was like having the awareness of what they were saying and then starting to be like, wait, but is that like, how do I know that's true? Like, I'm sitting here saying that I need a man to want me sexually to be good enough. But like, I see this girl over here, these two girls over here having dinner, and I think they're good enough. There's no man here hitting on them, like, but they're good enough. So why
Yeah.
wouldn't that be true for me? And I think that was the biggest game changer, was that spending time with myself.
For those who, because I know for a long time, like, didn't hear that voice. It was so suppressed down that I just I couldn't hear it. It took a while. For those that are kind of struggling with that, is there a way to kind of like expedite the process on being able to hear your inner voice?
Do you mean like you didn't have any internal monologue at all?
Yeah, like I would just try to silence everything. I would just focus so much on like I was like focused so much on just like nothing. Even when I meditated, I would just picture a black room and nothing in there, just completely empty. And for so long, I just didn't want to be with the thoughts of my past or anything. So I suppressed them down so far that there wasn't very much like inner monologue going. And if there was some like it was very negative, like I'm not good enough and stuff like that. But I always tried to just silence those as well instead of dealing with them.
Now, I'm not actually sure how true this is, but I have heard men have the ability to focus on nothing where women don't. So I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard it from multiple sources, but I've never actually looked into it. But I think part of it is that people are just so used to the voice in their head that they don't like that internal monologue, that they don't identify it as anything else. They're like, well, these are just my thoughts. And I know for me, for a long time, I was like, well, my thoughts are in my brain and my brain runs my body. So therefore, the thoughts must be true.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize like they're not true. That's just repetitively what I've heard or the meaning that I've given something. But if somebody is like really just disconnected, they're not aware of it because it can play on autopilot. There's a journaling technique called stream of consciousness writing that's talked about in the artist way. And basically, what you do is you're going to sit down with piece of paper, journal, and you're either going to write for 3 pages or 15 minutes. Either one, doesn't matter. And the goal is for those 3 pages or that 15 minutes, just keep the pen moving. And if you can't hear, you're just writing down the words in your head. Like the way to start this is just write down whatever words in your head, even if they don't make sense, even if they're not grammatically correct, even if it's just like random words, doesn't, whatever, just write it down. And if you're not aware of the words, then just write, I don't know the words in my head. I don't know what the words are. I don't know. And just keep writing it. And you'll start to become aware of that voice in your head doing that. And then usually, depending on how long you've been suppressing, it usually takes a week or two to kind of clear out that gunk. And then you can start asking yourself questions, because what happens is when we ask a question, our unconscious mind answers.
Yeah.
And our unconscious mind has access to vast amounts more. I'm talking like our unconscious mind gets 140 million pieces of information per second, but only 137 of those pieces come through consciously. So 140 million versus 137 total, not 137 million.
Yeah.
So it's like, I did the math one day. It's like less, it's like 0.0000001%
Yeah. That's
of our thoughts come through to the conscious mind, or what our unconscious mind has access to. And so, like, for example, if you said, "Hey, Tiffany, what's your favorite singer?" And the first thing that popped into my head was Miley Cyrus, right? That's my unconscious mind giving me that answer. But then what happens is the conscious mind will analyze it and decide, is this an appropriate answer? Right. So, she's getting good press these days. So maybe that is. But, when she cheated on Liam Hemsworth or cut her hair into a mullet, the whole twerking thing with Robin Thicke or whatever his name was, you might have gone, oh, I don't know if I can say that. And
yeah.
so we like refuse certain answers. And then your unconscious mind will throw forward another one like Britney Spears. Again, now there's a whole free Britney movement. That might be a good answer. But before that, before people found out about the conservatorship, it might have been like, oh, she had that whole like mental breakdown, shaved her head. I, and then people will be like, I don't know my favorite answer, right? Because they keep blocking it. So the stream of consciousness writing keeps a safe space for you just to write, because you're not having to make sense. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct, but you're getting in touch with that voice. And so then when people talk about like hearing God or getting downloads, this is what they're doing. Is they're just tapping into the unconscious and asking the question and just receiving whatever their unconscious mind is throwing forward without analyzing it.
Have you ever read the book, The Road Less Stupid?
No, I haven't.
Really good book. It's from a guy that was CEO of I believe, a couple really big companies. And he said that the main thing with his like success is what he calls thinking time. He sets a timer for, I believe it's 60 minutes. And he, just like you said, just continues to write, but he'll have a set of questions that he asks himself around his business, his marketing, his life, and stuff like that. And then he'll just continue to write. And if he's not writing, he puts a dot where the next like bullet and everything would be, the next dot. And then he would just start writing again. And that kind of reminded me of The Road Less Stupid and just having thinking time and being able to really start making your mind work for you.
Yeah, I think Ben Hardy talks about that either in Your Future Self or 10x is easier than 2x. But it's funny that you say that. That's one thing I'm working on. I told my husband, like, I need at least somewhere in my schedule, I want to block an hour to just think.
Yeah.
And I was
It's
saying to
hard with
him,
a kid. But
it, we have to like trade off, right? So I was like, I said to him the other day, hey, I kind of think I want to like rent a hotel room for one night and like check in right at check in time, go by myself, have no phone, no computer, no TV. The only thing I'm allowed to bring is my journal, no books. And I just want like that time from like check in to check out the next day just to think. You can take a whole weekend. If you don't want to do this, you can take a whole weekend. I'll watch Chad for a whole weekend. I was like, how do you feel about that? He was like, that sounds awful, to be honest. And I was like, okay, well, you can do whatever you want on your weekend. This is what I'm going to do on mine. But yeah, I think it is important. Like the more people I talk to that are in like that multi-million dollar, billion-dollar range, they talk about having that thinking time, like just
yeah.
giving yourself time to do nothing but think, like just see what comes through.
Yeah. I mean, Bill Gates, he'll go on, I think it's like 2 week vacations a couple times a year. Well, he'll bring like 20 something books and he'll just sit there and read the books and sit and think on what he's been reading. And how he can leverage those into his business and his philanthropy and stuff like that. I know a lot of people hate him, but he's created a lot of really epic stuff throughout the years. And
Yeah. Yeah. From an ethical standpoint, I'm not a fan, but from a innovator standpoint.
yeah. And then to wrap it up, what are some of like the horror stories you've seen that people kind of have gone through? Maybe it's other NLP practitioners that are doing some unethical stuff, or it's people that have come to you, they've tried all of these other different things. Like, what are some of the horror stories that you've heard along the way?
I mean, I think the biggest things are the shame that's used in coaching. Like I see all the time women manifesting coaches. I don't know why it's always them talking about like, if I trigger you, that's a sign you need to hire me. And there's like this like really shame like frequency behind it. And I'm like, there's a difference between like triggering and activation. Like if you trigger me because you're a shitty person, probably not somebody I want to work with.
Yeah.
I have a client who joined a high level mastermind. It was like a $50,000 program. And she went to this person's house in a small group to do some stuff. And the the men they were doing like a SWOT analysis, like going around, everybody say your strengths, everybody say your weaknesses. And they got to her and, what's your strength? And she said, I think when I'm like mentally on, I'm really magnetic. And the mentor was like, no, you're not. And she was like, what? Wait, what? Like, what do you mean by that? And she was just trying to understand it better. And he was like, you're not that magnetic. Next person. And she's like, no, no, no. Like, I just want some clarity. And he said to her, can you please be quiet? You're giving everyone a headache. And she called me like crying. Like, I paid 50 grand to be here, but I don't even want to go back tomorrow. Like, what do I do? And I was like, I don't even know what to tell you. Like, I can't ever imagine saying that. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is like the shame tactics that are used to like control people. Like, if you're having, I'm all for people taking accountability and ownership, but there's a difference between accountability and ownership and like shame and blame, right? It's like,
Yep.
hey, I did this. Here's how I can improve from it. That's accountability and ownership. And you are a piece of crap. You are the mistake. You're not good enough. So I think that's the thing that I would love to see the most is like, letting go of some of the like, for a lack of a better term, bro tactics, like the shaming, you know, both toxic masculine and feminine energies, the scarcity mentality. I see a ton of, I saw a wealth coach the other day talking about how, you know, all the wealthiest people should have to pay a wealth tax and like how dare they hoard wealth. And I'm like, you're a freaking wealth coach. Like how is that the frequency of what you're teaching? Like, so I mean, that's really what I look for now. We used to hop into mastermind super quick and ended up hiring a ton of really shitty coaches.
Yeah.
One of them tried to cancel us at one point um, for ridiculous reasons. But and like got his whole like posse to turn against us and badmouth us. But
I think I
now
know
we
who you're
like
talking about, but I don't.
probably we won't name names, but
Yeah.
you can probably figure it out. So we're a lot slower now to jump into masterminds. We'll jump into some lower ticket stuff and check the alignment, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing is like, is what they're practicing what they're preaching? If they talk about loving their haters, but there's constantly screenshots of them attacking people in their DMs coming out,
Yeah.
that's not alignment. If they're constantly posting things that have like a shame energy behind them, that's not alignment. So that's the most of the horror stories I hear are around the shame piece.
Yeah. No, I had an old client and his wife got mixed up into this group. I think they were in Canada and they all lived on this little island out there. And it ended up being like this really big cult. And the lady would have people come to her, like the head cultist or whatever you want to call her, would would have people like come to her house and make them wash her stuff. And if they didn't do it good enough, then she would like freak out on them. But everybody else was wrong. So if you were feeling triggered and stuff, you had to do clearing exercises and get rid of them. So that way you can make yourself right and all this stuff. And it's wild what is out there.
Yeah. I mean, I've had so many clients who have signed up for like manifesting courses and programs and coaching and things like that. And they'll be told, like, well, you just didn't want it bad enough. Or like, you just need to write down 100 more things that you're grateful for. And obviously you have to do the work. Like, I can't heal you. You have to show up for the calls and whatnot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, if you are showing up and you're doing the work and you're still not getting the change, then it's my job to figure out like what block might be there. I had a client a couple years ago who he thought the problem was a fear of success, but it was actually a fear of connection. So he was like blocking himself from making money in business because then he would have the time and the money to go out and make friends. But he believed that connection always equaled pain. So we're focused on this like fear of success, and nothing is shifting in his business. Well, it's my job as the coach. He's showing up and doing the work. Like, it'd be really easy for me to say, and I don't know if, some of these coaches just have their own work to do. It would be easy for me to be like, oh, well, you're not really into our clearings. You're not really going deep in the unconscious mind. But I knew he was.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, we need to figure out what the actual block here is. And we had to do some different things. We had to, go about things from a different approach to figure out that it was the fear of connection. And it like blew his business wide open. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think if you can honestly say to yourself, I have been doing the work. I've been showing up, I've been implementing, I've been asking questions, and it's not working and they're still blaming you, then it's not a good coach.
Love that. Yeah. No, 100%. Well, Tiffany, it's been a pleasure having you on here. If you want to let everybody know like where they can find you, I know you have was it a mastermind, um, different programs and stuff like that. So whenever you want to promote or wherever you want to push people, go ahead.
Yeah, the easiest thing, we have a podcast called The Cycle Breaker Show. You can check out Michael's interview on there as well. That's probably the easiest place to connect to us. And then we have a 7-day nervous system reset. So helping you get um, out of survival mode, out of fight, flight, freeze, so that you can actually create a new reality. And that is available when you check out our podcast. It's linked there. That's probably the easiest way.
Thanks for tuning in to the experts of the round table. Find Tiffany on the Cycle Breaker Show and discover her 7-day nervous system reset program. Join us next time as we continue to bring insights from industry leaders from all over the world.
I'm about to blow. I'm Tupac with the nouns and Biggie with